Hi, and welcome to Cultivated. This is Kristen. Before we were all in, there were quiet signs that we were slipping away. This is a story about the first time I realized something had changed, not dramatically, not with fire and brimstone, but with a twist of the TV knob. A quick note, in the group I grew up in, which some people call the 2x2s, the term the world referred to everything and everyone outside the group's version of truth. Friends, neighbors, pop culture, even playground games. The world was both ever present and deeply suspect. This is what it felt like to be about 7 and to slowly start losing access to the world. Not today. Mum twisted the TV knob. That's how we used to do things, young reader. As Fred yelled, "Yabba dabba doo," and my world began its slow, irreversible descent into beige. What? Why did you do that? Ryan and I yelled at her to turn it back on. You don't need to watch that at lunch anymore, Mum said as she headed back to the kitchen. This was outrageous. I righteously turned it back on. She was back in the living room instantly. Kristen, turn it off. Mum was no yeller, but I could tell she meant business. No, we already missed the beginning. I was generally not disobedient, but I also meant business. Off. When I refused, she did it herself. I held my ground. There was no way I was missing my show. I was indignant. Time was passing, and I had no idea what Fred and Wilma were up to. Q howled variations on, "It's not fair," and "Why not?" "There are better things you can be doing," she said. Her voice had the quiet finality I knew meant she wasn't budging. Because of the ridiculousness of the whole thing, I deployed several tactics in hopes one might work, beginning with what everyone else was doing. Not a solid approach, I'd learned. Q, tears to tantrum. We always watch it. Everybody does. I don't care what everybody does. She stood in the entrance to the living room. Go outside, read a book. I imagine her arms crossed, face firm. But it's lunch. I play at recess. I said this to no one as she'd returned to the kitchen. A sense of finality settled. It was well past noon. I'd already missed nearly the entire episode. I wept, continued to plead my case. I always watch it, never miss it, everyone. Nothing. I got a tissue from the bathroom, blew my nose, examined my face in the mirror. This made me cry harder. My face was blotchy, my lips were puffy, and my eyes looked small. I'd cried so hard, and now I couldn't stop. Time to go, Mum called from the kitchen. I'm not going. Her tone was mild. Of course you are. Get your shoes on. I can't. I'm not going. I couldn't stop sobbing. There was no way I could go back for the afternoon. Even if I could get myself under control, everyone would be able to tell from my face that I hadn't been. Yes, you are. Stop it. Get your shoes on. My brother, sneakers on, waited by the metal screen door. I was wild. I'm not going. To prove my point, I laid on the floor, heaved sobs I wasn't faking. There was no way I could manage walking to and then attending school. This was quite obvious. I can't, I wailed. I'm sure she forced my feet into my runners. I won't. I can't go. And yet you are. She stood me up and shoved me, gently but firmly, out the door. Ryan didn't say a word, but his face displayed alarm as he contemplated walking to school with his out-of-control big sister. That's all I recall. And before I go further, I want to say this plainly. My mom is a remarkable woman, smart, curious, grounded. When I asked her about this moment later, she said she just thought the Flintstones were kind of useless, which, fair enough. She had no idea at that point how far the new rules would stretch. It was incremental, almost imperceptible. This wasn't really a dramatic moment. It was a Tuesday or a Thursday. But something had shifted. I obviously went back for the afternoon. Gossamer thin memory indicates I'd hoped this strict rule would be a momentary blip. Things would return to normal. Missing that episode couldn't have been a big deal with my peers. If it had been, I'm certain I'd remember. It's likely no one mentioned it that afternoon, or if they did, the topic moved on. It's likely this wasn't the first day I had to decide between pretending I could participate or acknowledging I could not. But it was something. It was the first of many changes, and only a small indication of what else was to come. Gradually, the few TV programs I was still allowed to view made the list of programs I wasn't permitted to see. We moved shortly after into the house that had led us to the truth, and for a while the TV remained in the living room. I remember Friday nights watching a show about a helpful dog. Ginger ale and brown buttered popcorn with salt in a silver mixing bowl. Maybe the Dukes of Hazzard, although that's probably wishful thinking. The TV soon moved upstairs to my parents' room, where Mum watched Remington Steele. It became off limits to us kids, although all three of us sneak-watched when Dad wasn't home. Volume so low we sat inches from the screen to hear, close to the dial in case we misjudged his anticipated re-arrival and needed to snap it off, hoping he wouldn't run his hand along its warmth, know what we'd been doing. My brothers and I became even more frequent visitors to our grandparents' house a few doors down. Poor Grandpa took one look at our wide eyes and whispered, "Inspector Gadget," like it was a password for the resistance. He handed over the remote when we tumbled into their house, for homemade buns and pick-a-pop, certainly, but mainly for TV. Was this that big of a deal? Probably not in the grand scheme of things. And yet it was. I lost and continued to lose the cultural knowledge, the touch points that slotted me in as normal. When classmates mentioned characters or episodes, I had no idea what they were talking about. I didn't get jokes. Even teachers were baffled by what I didn't know, sometimes amused, sometimes irritated. It accumulated, of course, this not knowing, at parties later, at work. I still don't catch subtle references, can't participate in never-ending conversations about the icons that are the fabric of shared memory. Say family ties, and I'll assume you mean a cousin's custody battle. Night court sounds like something that happens in a town with one judge and a long line. My cultural knowledge is spotty, and I'm still frustrated when others travel memory lane together, reminiscing about something I'm forever outside of. Even if I watched these shows now, grainy reruns on YouTube, nostalgia wrapped in static, it wouldn't help. I'd still be outside. I was part of it all until one day I wasn't. And yet I still sat with those same kids in class, walked the same sidewalks, rode the same bus, but I wasn't invited anymore. I'd RSVP'd decline to a world I still desperately wanted to belong to. Friendship had been easy before. It was fine, I was told, to live among them. But my ticket to heaven? It depended on my disengagement from them. I didn't understand it at the time, not fully. I just knew I couldn't watch the Flintstones and that somehow that meant something larger was no longer mine. Looking back now, I see it clearly. I wasn't being punished. I was being prepared for a life where joy required justification, for a faith that prized silence over participation, for a salvation that depended on leaving the party early before anyone noticed you'd even come. And I was just a child. If you've enjoyed this, I'm glad. If it resonated and you think you know someone who might enjoy listening or reading this post, please pass it along, share it. And I'm so glad you're here. And thank you for listening.